What's your message to Joe Biden?
You.
Exactly what that worker expressed is frustration with the state of the country under Joe Biden. I think that's what Republicans have got to be running on.
Let's look at the week that was in terms of President Trump's days in court. Literally juggling 3 different trials this week, 2 of them in Manhattan, and then, of course, a day on the Supreme Court responding to the pending trial with regard to his activities on January 6th from Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. But first, in New York, I don't know who it is in the Trump campaign who brilliantly said, listen, if we got to be here, let's do some campaign events in Manhattan. But he stopped and an impromptu rally for Donald Trump at 6:30 in the morning with construction workers in Midtown Manhattan broke out, with construction workers chanting, "We love Trump" and "USA, USA." While he was there, Trump got the endorsement of the Builders Union in Manhattan. And then you had man on the street interviews such as this one from Newsmax.
What's it like seeing so many Republicans in Manhattan, so many Trump supporters in Manhattan? Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. It's turning now. Trump's turn again.
What's your message to Joe Biden?
You.
Okay, well, it doesn't get any more New York than that, does it? Andy, what do we think about just in terms of the political imagery, not the actuality of the trial and whether he's going to get convicted or any of that, but what he's doing politically while he's under fire with these court cases?
He's appeared to be unflappable. I love the fact that he's suggesting a rally in Madison Square Garden and campaign stops in the Bronx. I mean, to talk to him, you wouldn't think that he's being distracted by these trials or that he's being so unfairly treated and that he's spending a lot of money to defend himself. And I think that quote from the construction worker pretty much sends up, almost 4 years of Joe Biden. I think a lot of people can relate to that comment.
Yeah, I think, Akash, that might find its way into a political ad for the Trump. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they might be working with it.
No, that's totally reasonable, right? Which is that if this election is about Joe Biden will likely lose, right? His track record is absolutely horrendous. He's not fit for the job. And frankly, regardless of what your opinion is of the Trump trials, it seems like people aren't really thinking about, oh, Trump has said something obnoxious or offensive or things like that. Because that's not what's in the news, right? The trials are in the news and they might be chaotic and you might be upset about them. But then you turn around and look at President Biden's presidency, you see him on the stump, and it really makes you think twice. And so I think, exactly what that worker expressed is frustration with the state of the country under Joe Biden. I think that's what Republicans have got to be running on, which is that Joe Biden has caused chaos and created problems all around the globe. The economy obviously is particularly acute for America's working class, and that we know what success looks like. It's keeping taxes low, it's keeping regulations low, and we have a track record of success to point to with that.
Yeah, and Beverly, this construction worker, despite the colorful language, he also said something very fascinating that you've already alluded to, and that is it's time for Trump to get back. In other words, we're not just imagining what a Trump presidency might look like as a challenger to an incumbent. For the first time in, I believe, about 150 years, the American people are choosing from one president, an incumbent, and another president who we've already experienced, and we know what it's like under him. Does that give Trump a major advantage here?
It does. And I do think that these court appearances, these court cases are purely just campaign events for Trump himself. And this is why I think it helps him. And that is because so many people in this country actually feel that the government is against him, that everything is rigged, that there is this deep state. And so when these cases come against Trump, you take this wealthy Manhattan-born and raised man, and somehow he is the spokesperson and the leader of the working class. It's actually quite remarkable that liberals still haven't figured out that the more they go against him, actually the more support he gets. The only people watching these court cases are people who despise Trump and think that this is going to be the thing that finally buries him. He's only going to get more support the more you indict him, the more you have these cases, and they just frankly haven't learned at this point.
Yeah, and Beverly, it should be pointed out, too, that 20 years ago, before Donald Trump entered politics, to those construction workers, to that union, Trump was the boss.
Correct.
Right? He was the guy who hired them all,
yes,
negotiated the contracts, and then they were building buildings for him. But I think what the Democrats are hoping for here is you will see the poll, and they'll note the poll over and over again, that there is a certain percentage, a not insignificant percentage of voters, when asked if Trump is convicted of a felony, will you still vote for him? And that's the tipping point, it seems. And I'm asking you, Beverly, because it seems to be suburban women who will have that issue. But is it wise to make decisions based on a hypothetical? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, if he's convicted, but when actually faced with the reality of the conviction,
Right.
will it actually resonate differently?
I think it could. But I also think that with suburban women, there's always been an issue with them and President Trump for very obvious reasons. They don't like the way he interacts with women. And I know plenty of people who plan to vote for Trump who do not like his style, but they say, look, if these are the two options, I can't vote for Biden. I have to vote for the policies that are going to be best. And we also see this as well. We see a turning point, or at least more people in communities of color going for Trump, saying that they're going to vote for him. So that I think that economic side of this could overtake what the loss of suburban women vote, the decline there. I think he's gaining in other ways. Yes, a guilty verdict could play a part. I think that's the one turning point. The question is whether or not that will take place.
Well, let's turn to the larger court story this week, and that was the arguments yesterday in the Supreme Court over presidential immunity and this term absolute immunity, which does sound a little dictatorship-like, right? Andy, I'm curious if you think, as this argument plays out, are people looking at it as, well, this is all about Trump, or are they looking at it the way I think they should be, which is this is about the presidency and how things like this affect the presidency, and whether this is a wise thing to do to a president, because if it's allowed, then it's going to open up the floodgates for future presidents.
I would agree with you. And I think that this has to do more with the presidency and the office of the presidency rather than one individual, specifically for what you just said. If this is allowed, then what's going to stop the politicians on either side of the aisle from going after their enemies? Not good for the country. It's certainly not good for freedom. And it's a horrible look. So I think that what the Supreme Court is doing is looking at the larger picture, looking at the office of the presidency for what it is, as an honorable place for the leader of the free world to conduct the business of our country and to expand freedom throughout the world. And I think the Supreme Court is taking a hard look at that.
Akash, I would love for you to address that as well in the constitutional aspects, because I think of AFP, I think about, constitutional standards and norms. But at the same time, I also want to show this graphic so everybody can see it. It's a brand new Real Clear Politics average. They're now going to track the conglomerate of the battleground states, right? So you can sort of track the trends in those all-important battleground states. We all know which states we're talking about. And Trump is clearly beating Biden right now. If they had the election today, he'd get over 325 electoral votes. I mean, after California, New York, and Illinois, Biden's in pretty big trouble in terms of the big ticket wins. So go ahead, Akash, in terms of the larger constitutional questions and, more importantly, how it's affecting the election.
Again, I think it's a difficult question, right? That is some level of immunity necessary? Likely, yes. Should it be unlimited? I mean, again, these are difficult questions for the court. I think there's some common sense places where most Americans would probably draw the line. Obviously, there's a distinction between presidential conduct and personal conduct, but it is a question that's much larger than President Trump. Now, as far as how all of this plays politically, I think Beverly alluded to an important point, which is that people are weighing their economic concerns. Are they able to make ends meet, put food on the table, versus the chaos that they saw from President Trump and his personal behavior versus what they might get in a second term from either of these people. But I think the fact of the matter is that in these swing states in particular, right, the cost of living is going up. There's a lot of Hispanic families in a lot of these states. When you think of Arizona, Georgia, even Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, people who historically have been a little bit more lower income. And so economic concerns are very acute. And again, I go back to my prior point, which is that if this election is a referendum on Joe Biden and on the economy and on issues like the border, right, the things that are impacting people most directly, what they see and what they feel most directly in their communities, that's what we're hearing every day at Americans for Prosperity. We're out every single day talking to millions of voters in these, swing states and other states across the country. It's the economy and it's the border that's resonating. If these are the key issues going into November, then Democrats are in trouble up and down the ballot.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was fascinated by the arguments in the Supreme Court, and I'll give myself the final word. When justices, as well as lawyers, sort of made the case, like Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Should they have been able to, go after him for that? FDR and the internment of American citizens of Japanese descent. Barack Obama killing civilians with drones without any due process. Obviously, there's got to be some serious immunity. And we'll see what the Supreme Court decides there.